morning. My name is Daniel Long. I am a moderator for the Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies Institute. Today is Friday, November 15, 2024. The theme of our forum today is entitled New Philippine Maritime Acts. Lawfare 2.0 shrinks Philippine territory. Kamentong Laurel and Paglinawan will be giving presentation on this subject.
Okay, magandang araw sa lahat dito po sa ating bayan at sa mundo po na makikinig po dito sa ating mga paliwanag. Good morning to our international friends also. We are going to be discussing the recent maritime acts that Bongbong Marcos signed, and we see it as a bankrupt approach, this lawfare. So let me begin with our reading of my position paper. The arbitration panel in 2014 was the first major use of lawfare on the Philippine dispute with China over territorial and EEZ questions. It not only accomplished zero, gained not an inch of territory, but created a grievous loss of historically recognized territorial claim that the Treaty of Paris established, and continues to damage today the Philippines' diplomatic standing in the ASEAN and among the global majority, wrecking Philippine economic development prospects. Yung image natin, tungkol yan. No? So, we go back to this report from Rappler on 2015 when Justice Carpio, the chief proponent I referred to, promised the Filipino people that China will be forced to comply, that China will comply. Now we have I've inserted the date is not shown there, it's there, November 10, 2024. China reasserts South China Sea sovereignty amid Philippine boundary north. So after 10 years of the beginning of the filing of the arbitration case in 2014, 10 years later, no compliance, and in 2016, the arbitration award was announced. 8 years later, there is no acceptance, no compliance. This is a bankrupt approach, this lawfare being waged by the Philippine government under Bongbong Marcos, as pushed behind by the United States of America. The bankruptcy of lawfare in the course of litigating the South China Sea dispute at the arbitration panel at The Hague and the 2016 awarding a proponent of the case against China, Justice Antonio Carpio assured Filipinos repeatedly that China will be forced to comply. 10 years after the filing of the case and 8 years after the award, nothing of the sort has transpired, while China has tightened even more its legitimacy and control of the disputed area. The arbitration lawfare failed for 10 years, hence the Filipino proponents, proxies of the real engineers of the anti-China lawfare, the US, at a loss after the total collapse of the case, introduces phase 2 of the lawfare and the puppet President Bongbong Marcos that the official government media announced. PBBM inks 2 laws reinforcing Philippine rights over its maritime zones, acts that are unenforceable and ignored internationally. From there, they escalated with kinetic cognitive warfare, that I call. That's in between the lawfare initiative of the US and its Filipino proxies, escalated the situation with the kinetic cognitive warfare starting February 2023, with maritime provocations aimed at baiting the Chinese Coast Guard into police action, ranging from laser light warnings reported falsely as military grade to cause injury to Filipino Coast Guard men, PCG, Philippine Coast Guard ships crossing paths of Chinese Coast Guard ships reported as ramming by the in Western international media, and then the water cannoning incidents. The kinetic cognitive warfare named Operation Muso, initiated by U.S. Special Operations Group Sea Light, the Americans aimed to inflict, in quotes, reputational costs on China, unquote, and, to quote again, build international support, unquote, against China. All the aims have failed as China's prestige continues to rise within the region in ASEAN and Asia, and globally through BRICS Plus, among the global majority in APEC, G20, and in the United Nations. China's actions in intercepting Philippine Coast Guard, quote unquote, resupply missions are prevention of U.S. construction of forward operating bases behind Philippine violations of no construction materials resupply mission to various shoals, forced entry into protected lagoon of the Scarborough Shoal, a clandestine Philippine Navy resupply operation where a Philippine sailor lost a thumb, and lastly, the BRP Teresa of Banwa as a second artificially grounded ship at Sabina Shoal. The assertive transparency, also known as Transparency Initiative, has similarly failed. China has repeatedly said it's ready to meet halfway. Let's show the report of Ambassador Hong Xilian. China has maintained its posture of continuing openness, offering to meet halfway at every tense and critical juncture to resolve issues. The Philippines has been compelled to close its doors and windows to China's goodwill by the pivot to the US of Bongbong Marcos. The repeated rejection of China's goodwill and joint development offers will just consign the Philippines to the backwaters of ASEAN and advance US plans for Ukraine 2.0 in Asia. So we see there the report from January 18, 2024. China hopes Philippines steers towards bringing bilateral ties back on track, and the insertion of the GMA News Online, Huang urges Philippines to meet China halfway on West Philippine Sea, uphold one China policy. ASEAN success with China. Let's project the next slide. The path taken by other ASEAN stakeholders in the South China Sea routes has been peaceful and productive dialogue that lead to win-win solutions. For example, Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto has just signed on November 10, 2024, a $10 billion deal with President Xi Jinping that promised a, quote, common understanding on joint development in areas of overlapping claims, unquote, effectively setting aside the dispute and engaging in mutually beneficial economic endeavors. I will just add a few comments here. So this is very positive. This will already allow Indonesia and China to do joint ventures, extraction of oil and gas, extraction of other minerals in the disputed areas between Indonesia and China. But we must note also that US proxies within Indonesian political scene, within the Indonesian political scene, are already surfacing and actively opposing this, insisting that there are no overlapping claims, insisting that there is only UNCLOS to base claims on, which is absolutely false, which is the same mythology they are projecting in the Philippines. There is also the international customary law, which is much broader, and therefore there is no resolution if the insistence on just using UNCLOS is the basis. There is no resolution there. That is why setting aside of the dispute through this agreement will open up the real prospects of billions and billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of benefits to partners in such joint ventures. Now, the United States of America and the Western allies are actively opposing this, preventing this, obstructing this, to prevent resolution positively of the issues in the South China Sea territorial dispute. That should be obvious by now after 10, 20 years of stoking tension, particularly using the Philippines, and which aborted a very important and beneficial project, the Philippine-China Joint Oil and Gas Exploration and Development Project that was sabotaged by US proxies in the Philippines. So, that is Indonesia. On November 7th, 2024, Anwar Ibrahim of Malaysia, a major contender over the Spratlys, in a visit to President Xi Jinping, committed to, quote, strengthening collaboration with China beyond trade, unquote, and adding or saying, we view China not just as a leader of the East, but as a voice for the global South, one that champions the interests of the developing world. We look forward to your continued support, Mr. President, as your presence is critical to the success of ASEAN. In October 2024, Vietnam, another contender in the Spratlys, signed with China 10 deals ranging from agricultural cooperation to cross-border QR code payments that will further boost bilateral trade, already up today by 21% in the first 3 quarters of 2024 at $148 billion. The two countries cooperate to implement signed documents on railway links, modern railway development effectively. Now we go to the Philippines, and let's look at our slide for the background. Left out of all these positive developments between ASEAN countries and China is the Philippines. Although it had an early start with President Duterte's, quote, joint oil gas venture, unquote, with China, that US-Filipino proxies, principally Manuel Paglinawan and minions like Teddy Boy Locsin, sabotaged. Since that termination of the deal, more economic projects from China have been cancelled by the Philippines, such as the 4 major railway projects, among others. ASEAN exports to China in 2024, in the first 8 months of 2024, increased by 10.5%, despite weak Philippine exports to China falling by 9.1% year-on-year. The Philippines lost the potential to restore the 2 million Chinese tourist arrivals attained in 2019 and performing now dismally in 2024 to 20 to 25% of 2019 levels. All this deleterious impact from Bongbong Marcos's pivot to the US. Let's show the news about the collapse of Chinese tourism in the Philippines. The next slide. Yes, the collapse of Chinese tourism in the Philippines. As foreign tourist arrivals recovered in Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, and Indonesia, the Philippines figure was still around 60%, 10 to 20% lower than the peer countries. I'm missing a page here. Let me take a look at the last. Okay, and the final segment of our position paper here, Philippine loans for U.S. arms. In the midst of exploding poverty, rampant inflation, bloating national debt, the Philippines is compelled by the U.S. warmongering and badgering to expand military arms buildup and purchases by ramping up debt and borrowing. Filipinos are being duped to swallowing this wasteful acquisition of arms, missiles, and warplanes, no amount of which can win any war the Philippines chooses, while its economy is third rate even by ASEAN standards. So we see the latest news, November 12, 2024, Teodoro announcing that the Philippines may buy, but not borrow Typhoon missiles under Trump. Whether it buys or it borrows, it simply means that the Philippines will borrow because the Philippines is a net borrowing country. In the meantime, you can see the inserts, GMA News Online, Philippine debt balloons to new record high of 15.18 trillion pesos as of end of February 2024. And the SWS survey shows that 58% of Filipino families rate themselves poor in the second quarter survey of 2024. There is nothing to crow about in the signing of the two new maritime laws defining the delusional claims of the Philippines under BBM, under Bongbong Marcos. The Philippines will just continue to eat crow, until the final calamitous outcome of the strategy of tension and conflict it is engaged in, not only with China, but increasingly with its ASEAN neighbors over the undermining of regional peace and prosperity it is engaging with the U.S. warmonger. End of April. So we can check later on our audience on Zoom if there are any questions. My colleague, Mr. Paglinawan, will elaborate on the main theme of the maritime laws of Bongbong Marcos. Instead of gaining territory, losing territory. So, Adam, maybe you can start.
Okay, good morning to all of you, and welcome to Asian Century Philippines Institute for Strategic Study. The title of my dissertation is Escalation of Lawfare, Loss of 900,000 square kilometers of territorial sovereignty by just one act of a pen, as Bongbong Marcos signs a confused bill into law. This is not without fair warning. As early as last March, and how many months had it been? In my Ang Maestro episode 210, entitled The Idiotization of the Filipino. And after a week, episode 211, Severe Loss of Sovereign Territory. Both reference the Senate Bill 2492, primarily sponsored by the biggest pig brain in the Senate, Francis Tolentino. At that time, we said a law is supposed to resolve a problem, but this bill creates more problems than solutions. First, it does not resolve the incoherence of Republic Act 9522, our baseline law passed in 2009, with the Presidential Decree 1596 and our treaty limits by historical rights of title. We stand to lose, therefore, sovereign territorial waters. Number two, the Maritime Zones Law is a codification of the 2016 arbitral ruling, which neoconservatives in the Philippines and in the United States consider as a victory, but which contradicts many parts of the proposed law, which we will illustrate. Number three, there is a delusional reference to a West Philippine Sea involving unilateral cession of exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, where we can exercise sovereign rights only into our internal waters and archipelagic waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, where we have sovereignty. Number four, not based on strategic, diplomatic, but legal theories that do not support our national interest, but that of a foreign country, the United States, that wants a guaranteed freedom of navigation between China and the Philippines. This lawfare escalates the conflict in the South China Sea as China, Vietnam, and now even Malaysia immediately protests our canine devotion to our former colonial master. And lastly, it portends of high economic costs to the Filipino. Let me deal with the first. Philippine historic rights of title. In a paper by Laurel Bautista in ResearchGate on December 2009, the fundamental position of the Philippines that limits its national territory are the boundaries laid down in the 1898 Treaty of Paris, which ceded the Philippines from Spain to the United States. To be precise, as President Bongbong Marcos has also confirmed in his speeches, these are defining the territorial boundaries of the Philippines. Number one, the Treaty of Peace between the U.S. and the Kingdom of Spain in December 1898, hereinafter referred to as the Treaty of Paris. Number two, the treaty between the Kingdom of Spain and the United States of America for cession of outlying islands of the Philippines on November 7, 1900, otherwise known as the Treaty of Washington. And finally, as if to lock forever our claim to Sabah, 6 years before the United States granted us our Commonwealth in 1936, in 1930, the U.S. and Great Britain signed the Convention of 1930 delimiting the boundary between the Philippine archipelago and the state of North Borneo. These lines were drawn from the colonial treaties defining the unity of land, water, and people which the Philippine archipelago all the waters embraced within 3 imaginary lines are its territorial waters, which we regard with sovereignty, or for that matter, ownership. As presented by none other than our Senator Arturo Tolentino, no relations to the brains of Francis Tolentino. In 1974. So what we have here, what do we have here when it comes to the maritime law? Loss of sovereign territorial seas, exchange for sovereign rights, a total of 830,000 square kilometers. As you can see in the chart, in an orange, it is positioned as our territorial sea. And there it is, with Treaty of Paris delimitations. We have 940,260 square kilometers. But with Republic Act 9522 and further into the Maritime Zones Law, that has been reduced by 110,000 square kilometers. Onto an exchange for an economic zone of 1,106,000 square kilometers. So we have a loss of 830,000 where we exercise sovereignty and ownership by virtue of historic right, by virtue of the treaty limits. Okay? And we exchange this for sovereign rights, which we will define later. By the way, this chart is an elucidated version of what has been included in the Supreme Court decision GR 187167. And so Republic Act 9522 was confirmed as being unconstitutional by GR 187167. And if only to cite a particular footnote, the ponente was Antonio Carpio. We go further. In an article of Rigoberto Teglao, former ambassador to Greece and Cyprus, Marcos Jr. gives up what his father acquired, 70,000 square kilometers. On the left, you see, before 2024 Maritime Zones Law, we had a polygon shown in red line, which we call the Kalayaan Island Group. But on the right, after the Maritime Zones Law, that polygon disappeared. So there you go. So what is this all about? 830,000 of sovereignty acquired through historic title and 70,000 square kilometers of claims to a total of 900,000 square kilometers. Why? Because the law has always been argued by the neoconservatives in our society, following the neoconservatives of Washington in the Center for Strategic and International Studies. They have deliberately ignored the asymmetry. Sovereignty and territorial seas is defined in international law to mean that a government possesses full control over affairs within a territorial or geographical area or limit. Whereas sovereign rights, according to just one treaty, which is definitely not the embodiment of the entire international law, but which the Philippines and its American patrons always call as the international law. It is just one of more than 250,000 treaties. And therefore, it is a clear application of the US rule-based order. What is this sovereign right? According to UNCLOS, the coastal state has sovereign rights in 200 nautical miles of exclusive economic zones for the purpose of exploring, exploiting, conserving, and managing the natural resources within living or non-living of the water super adjacent to the seabed and of the seabed and its subsoil. Therefore, sovereign rights only refer to the economic exploitation of what is under the water, the fish, and other natural resources, whether living or non-living. Economic benefits. You don't own the surface of the water because the surface of the water remains to be international waters. And you only get economic benefits under the water. Whereas sovereignty, you own what is under the water, over the water, the aerospace above it. When sovereign rights conflicts with another state's sovereignty, the resolution is not exact science, but can be cured. Can it be cured by legislation such as the Maritime Zones Law? Only from the perspective of the Philippines, because that is an internal law. But it cannot supersede international law, just as sovereign rights cannot supersede sovereignty. UNCLOS has provided for compulsory arbitration, but most countries prefer easier route through diplomacy and bilateral negotiations to attain conflict resolution. And this is where I question the foreign policy of President Marcos Jr., which seems to be locked into negotiating on the basis of strength. But with regard to China, ladies and gentlemen, which is stronger? Law, lawfare, or diplomacy? Legal leverage or friendship? And you, ladies and gentlemen, decide for yourself. And where do we get the confidence, the fake confidence, to use lawfare against a superpower like China and still claim that we are arguing from a position of strength? from the codification of the arbitral ruling. It is a flawed genesis. What is not common knowledge is that the treaty signatories of the UNCLOS are allowed to issue declarations addressed to the UN Secretary General upon signing, upon ratification, or at any time thereafter to express where the treaty cannot harmonize with their internal laws. And if we can flash this image only, we will see that not only China and the Philippines have declared their own reservations about UNCLOS. And we refer to the convention declarations in this link. There you are. Can we move it upwards, please? And show the countries that have manifested exemptions to certain provisions of UNCLOS. There you go. Look how many countries could not harmonize all the data and specifications of UNCLOS to their own internal law. By the way, you will never see the United States in that list because the United States signed UNCLOS, but it did not ratify it. Therefore, the United States is not a member of UNCLOS. Further, the arbitral case has been flawed from the very beginning because both countries acted separately, opted out of compulsory arbitration under the treaty. And here is the statement of Ambassador Rosario Manalo from the 6th minute to the 9th minute, if we can play it. Extend.
I hope I'm not branded as a traitor to the company. But if you study very carefully international law, arbitration was not set up correctly when we claim our right to the Kalayaan Group of Thailand. I was breaking my brains trying to find out from international law books on what and everywhere, arbitration tribunal calls for 3 parties who are claiming whatever they're claiming, and between the two, selection of a combine. And when arbitration is carried out, it is always voluntary. Under the UN Charter, it is always voluntary. However, in the UNCLOS, there was a provision of or something that made arbitration a mechanism for solving compulsory under the UNCLOS. But the Philippines, when we ratified and approved the UNCLOS, opted out hindi natin gagamitin yung compulsory registration. Not even us talking with the Chinese or whatever, equally the same, the Chinese opted out of that provision. So, both the Philippines and China cannot involve compulsory arbitration under the UNCLOS because we forced it out. What is the remedy? And under the UN Charter, it's voluntary arbitration. Philippines wanted it. Ayaw ng China, voluntary. Tell China, what did you do?
Arbitration panel. That is not even an arbitration panel. That's just a Philippine panel handpicking the people who will render the very issue that we want at binabayaran yun ang panahon nila. Eh, ikaw ba naman kung babayaran ka at andun ka, hindi ba bibigay mo yung favorable position? That is the China is question. Now, I'm not trying, please understand, I'm not trying to be traitor to my country. I love my country. Pero hindi tama.
Going back to slide number 6, here is the statement of Senator Amy Marcos. The arbitral decision may have invalidated China's 9 claim, but also shrunk the Philippines' sovereign claims in the Kalayaan Island Group. The result of that declaration, claims in the Kalayaan Island Group, is that some rocks are entitled to a territorial sea, but none are entitled to an exclusive economic zone. This is a fact long suppressed by those who failed at diplomacy and now promote a more belligerent confrontation with China. We move back to our slide. In international law, what Rosario Manalo was emphasizing is that in pursuance of the hallowed principle of state consent, she kept on hammering at the word voluntary. You cannot force any state to enter into an agreement without its consent. So what do we have here? In this video, we have a confused presidency. Let's play the video. How's that? Yeah. This is to show you how narrow the appreciation of the president is all about. You want this replayed for clarity? Okay.
Set up correctly when we claim our right to the Kalayaan Group of Islands. I was breaking my brains trying to find out from international law books authorities what is an arbitration tribunal. And everywhere, an arbitration tribunal calls for 3 parties. The 2 who are claiming whatever they're claiming, and between the 2, the selection of an umpire. And when arbitration is carried out, it is always voluntary. Under the UN Charter, it is always voluntary. However, in the UNCLOS, there was a provision or an attachment or something that made arbitration as a mechanism for solving compulsory under the UNCLOS. But the Philippines, when we ratified and approved the UNCLOS, we opted out of that provision, which means hindi natin gagamitin yung compulsory arbitration. We just didn't want it. All right. Without even us talking with the Chinese or wherever, equally the same, the Chinese opted out of that provision. So, both the Philippines and China cannot invoke compulsory arbitration under the UNCLOS because we both opted out. So what is the remedy? Dalhin natin sa UN. Under the UN Charter, which is voluntary arbitration. Philippines wanted it. Ayaw ng China. Voluntary. They say, you cannot tell China, "Hoy, you have to do it." Because, no, it's voluntary. So what did we do? We went and proceeded to set up an arbitration panel. That is not even an arbitration panel. That's just a Philippine panel handpicking the people who will render the very issue that we want at binabayaran nyo ng panahon nila. Ikaw ba naman kung babayaran ka at andun ka, hindi ba bibigay mo yung favorable position? That is why China is...
Ladies and gentlemen, compare that kind of reasoning to this kind of reasoning of a confused president. Let us hear President Bongbong Marcos Jr. himself.
Of China's proposals on the South China Sea dispute, particularly its 10-dash line in asserting control over the disputed waters. In a joint press conference with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Berlin, Marcos stresses that China's 10-dash line claim is not recognized by any country. According to the president, the Philippines did not reject China's proposals but questioned its premise in the territorial dispute.
We have not rejected any proposals that China has made to us, but the premise is something that we question. And with that premise that China has made is that their territory is follows what is now described as a 10-dash line. This is not recognized by any country, any international body, certainly not by the Philippines.
The Department of Foreign Affairs earlier said the country could not consider several maritime-related proposals from China because they were against the Philippines' national interests. Marcos says there will be difficulty to move forward with discussions while China continues to intrude the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. According to Marcos, he has the duty as the president to defend the country's maritime and land-based territory and that he will continue to do so. In a separate speech before the Filipino community, Marcos gives assurance he will not allow other nations to claim Philippine territory amid the maritime row with China.
Dahil nagkakaproblema po tayo, ay may ibang bansa na sinasabi yung ating teritoryo ay kanila pala. At ngunit sa asahan ninyo ay hindi po tayo papayag dahil maliwanag naman ito ay bahagi ng Pilipinas.
Ayan mga kabansa, klarong-klaro. Unang-una, I would like to say that the President in his opening sentence was mentioning a half-truth. Ang sabi niya, he has not rejected any of China's proposals. But it's very clear from the declaration of the Chinese embassy itself that there is now difficulty in the negotiations going on for the 11 agenda that have been left by President Duterte and that has flowed on to President Marcos Jr. Number two, China's claim is not based on the 9-dash line, but on its historic rights. And there is nothing malum in se inherently wrong. The arbitral ruling itself said in paragraph 267, because the tribunal is not addressing the questions of sovereignty, evidence concerning either party's historical use of the islands of the South China Sea is of no interest with respect to the formation of historic right. On to paragraph 272, and I will just quote the middle provision. In particular, the tribunal emphasizes that nothing in this award should be understood to comment in any way on China's historic claims to the islands of the South China Sea. Ladies and gentlemen, just a quick insight of this. After World War II, the Japanese restored the Philippines to what country? The United States of America. Because the Philippines then was still a territory of the United States of America. We were under a Commonwealth under the US. To whom did the Japanese turn over the entire South China Sea, which is embodied in the 9-dash line, the Paracels, the Spratlys, the Hainan Island, the Pratas Islands, the Pescadores, even Taiwan, and Manchuria, for that matter. To which country did Japan return those territories, sovereign territories? Was it to the United States? No. Was it to France? No. Was it to Vietnam? No. Was it to the Philippines? No. It was returned to China. And if you cannot understand that, I don't know what is going on between your ears. To resolve disputes like this, UNCLOS has provided for compulsory arbitration, according to Ambassador Rosario Manalo. But both of the Philippines opted for bilateral negotiation. Now, why did we resort to arbitration? Which is not only a violation of our declaration to the UN pertaining our signature and ratification of UNCLOS. Number two, which is in violation of our treaty with China, where Marcos and Shaw and I signed the communique of 1975, saying that all conflicts and disputes between China and the Philippines are to be resolved through bilateral negotiation. So why is the Philippines always improvising a legal maneuver? Who do you think we are outsmarting? Why? Because for now, it has now therefore become obvious that with the improvisation in the Maritime Zones Act of the 200 nautical miles of EEZ and 150 nautical miles of additional continental shelf, next slide please, instead of merely 12 nautical miles of territorial waters from the baselines configured by Republic Act 9522. What is happening here? But the real intentions of the maritime law is to expand the buffer zone between the South China Sea and the Philippines, providing for a wider free navigational lane of international waters for US military ships and more flexible distance between China and the Philippines for the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement basis to flex and operate. Why? Let us compare the benefits and disbenefits. What have we gotten from the US? 500 million for 5 years military assistance. Number two, military exercises to show ironclad commitment. Number three, America Competes Act bribes to select groups to lobby the American presence in this country. Number four, no free trade. The US has continuously ignored and rejected. Now have a weaker peso, and we have a runaway inflation. Why? Because we're missing on benefits coming from China. No 23 billion in economic assistance has come our way, as promised by Xi Jinping. Why? Because Marcos is blocking it. 1.8 million Chinese tourists record in 2019, down to 300,000 in 2023. No infrastructure development, except those that's ongoing, that were started during the time of Duterte. No new bridges. And definitely abandonment of the 60-40 oil and gas deal, joint exploration with China, where we have been given the upper hand of 60% of the proceeds, while China funds it, explores it, do the engineering works and construction, while we just sit on our ass and wait for our 60% share. Number 4, declining exports to China. Our banana exports are affected. The agricultural workers are affected. In pineapple and even in durian. Increasing imports from China. And our gross domestic product, because we have, in the past 2.5 years, that really experienced real growth. There is no real growth, just a maneuvering of our financial statements. Thanks to the magician, the Finance Secretary Lawfare. Number 5, no new money. There is little money in circulation, and that's why the inflation is going up. Why? Because no foreign investments are coming in. 6, delayed participation at BRICS, because as earlier mentioned by Carmen, the United States does not want us to participate in the BRICS. If the people do not benefit from the Maritime Zones law, and only the United States hegemonic interests are served, what possible motive has President Marcos Jr. in signing into law? And that is why there are speculations of a treasonous sellout. And in a periodical that came out, Asia Week, Chinese edition, the magazine draws from many inside sources the reason why Marcos made a 180-degree turn in Philippine foreign policy and turned against China. BBM made a Faustian bargain with the Americans to reclaim the $61 billion of the estate of his father, Ferdinand Edrelin Marcos. That is the speculation, which is now becoming more and more probable. Well, anyway, a new president is coming to the United States. We are all eagerly awaiting what Marcos Jr.'s onerous foreign policy will come up with after January 20, when President Donald Trump swears into office. But for now, let me end my presentation by citing the wisdom of his father, Ferdinand Edrelin Marcos. If the purpose of the American military bases is to strengthen American military posture in the Pacific, or in the Indian Ocean and throughout the world, does this not expose the Philippines to the animosities, suspicions, and conflicts arising out of this American military buildup? animosities and conflicts that we have no participation in the making. And do not these bases endanger the safety of the Filipinos and the Philippines not only from conventional armed attack, but from possible nuclear attack? Ladies and gentlemen, we submit our case for your consideration. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Okay, we have made presentations relevant to the recent hullabaloo over the two acts signed by President BBM. And now to the other exciting event the past day, the appearance of former President Rodrigo R. Duterte at the Quadcom in the Philippine House of Representatives, where our representative also, Mr. Danny Long, attended, as well as our group, UFCC, our allied group, United Filipinos Consumers and Commuters, who staged a picket outside the House of Representatives, lambasting the International Criminal Court and the shenanigans of the House of Representatives in relation to the effort of the International Criminal Court under the inspiration of the United States of America to persecute the Duterte family, particularly former President Duterte, and the president to be elected in 2028, Sara Duterte. So we will hear the exciting blow-by-blow in the hearing from our colleague Danny Long, who joined the hearing and met with President Duterte and Madam Sara Duterte. So Danny, take it away.
Thank you, Kamentong, Laurel. My name is Daniel Long. I'm 22 years old. I am a writer for the Asian Century Journal. Kamentong Laurel, earlier this week, 2 days ago, tasked me to represent the Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies Institute to participate in the WADCOM hearings where they investigate the war on drugs by former President Duterte, and former President Duterte was attending the hearing. I showed up at 9 a.m. at the front gate of the House of Representatives. I approached the guard and I told him I was representing media, and I asked if I was able to go in to cover the hearing. I was told that I needed a petition, so I was denied entry. So I just decided to join the pro-Duterte supporters outside, just across the street from the House of Representatives. Our colleague also, Ka-RJ Habeliana, was there with his group to show his support for the former president and reject this intervention by the foreign unelected entity, the International Criminal Court, to investigate the alleged police brutality killings and the war on drugs. I stayed because I was inspired by the courage of the former president. It was a grueling 14 hours for the 80-year-old man. They subjected him paulit-ulit, the same recycled drama about EJK, victims, scripted questions, and the former president faced all of that, all for love of country. Former president was not even able to eat much. He had one small sandwich, and in fact, there was even a video showing that while all the other resource persons, witnesses, and the congressmen, while they all had the summit sparkling water, the former president merely had a plastic bottle summit water you can buy for 15, 20 pesos at the nearest 7-Eleven. The former president also reminded his former peers, the congressmen, the congresswomen, that it is not the mandate of these legislators to investigate. They are not the police, they are not the NBI, they are not the CIDG. At the end of the hearing, I shook the hand of the former president and thanked him for his service to the country. I am grateful to him for making our streets safe to walk at night, kept our communities free from drugs, from crime, and from terrorism. I did not care that the hearing was supposed to last, by the former president's suggestion, until 4 in the morning or 2 in the morning even. I was grateful. And to see across the room enemies of the state, protectors of drug lords, legal urban operatives of the communist terrorists who have recruited so many in my generation to fight a useless revolutionary struggle. Sacrifice. Throughout the hearing, everyone, the focus, it seems, were the few cases of victims of the war on drugs, or as the former president would say, collateral damage. But nobody seemed to care about the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives destroyed by the drug lords, by these criminals, by these drug pushers, the families that have been destroyed. Nobody talks about the victims of these by these drug addicts, murder, rape, stabbings, killings. What these drugs do to a person's brain, turns them into a zombie, increases their tendency for violent behaviors. Sino bang nakinabang dun sa war on drugs na yan? Hindi ba tayo? Tayong lahat? All of us who are law-abiding citizens, we benefited from the drug. CPRRD ba nakinabang dun? Hindi. He is now facing a trial by publicity and even trial by a foreign entity. He did not have to do this. It was a tremendous sacrifice on his part. So if we don't protect the former president, the future generation will not be protected by from these drug lords and these criminals and these terrorists. The problem with these investigators, and from the last hearing in the Senate naman, from the likes of Risa Hontiveros and the liberals, is that they represent the voice of the elite, those who live in gated communities who have never gotten the chance to experience the realities of the drug problem firsthand. They think na pwede mong lapitan itong mga drug lords na armado na may baril at kala nila pwede idaan sa usapan sila. Akala nila you can approach these criminals operating in a billions of pesos industry very mindful, very demurely, please, sumuko na po kayo. Meanwhile, the former President Duterte represents the voice of the ordinary people. He speaks the language of the streets. He dealt with the realities of the drug problem firsthand, very context-driven. For example, if a police officer implements an arrest and the suspect fights back, lumaban, it is unfortunately black and white. It is his life or the life of the drug lord. And unfortunately, I would concede that the liberals are correct, that we have an imperfect justice system. You're right. We have an imperfect justice system because right now we seem to value the human rights of these low-life criminals over the human lives of innocent, everyday, law-abiding citizens. That is the problem. I was very protective of Tatay Digong yesterday or 2 days ago in the hearing. I and Dr. Lorraine Badoy and former NYC Chairman Ronald Cardema. Initially, they did not allow us to enter the session hall in the Congress. They kicked out Dr. Lorraine, and PRRD himself intervened to have her come back inside. And all these congressmen tried to intimidate the former president by packing the session hall with victims or the families of the victims of the extrajudicial killings. And then they even tried na itabi si PRRD at yung mga ibang kalaban niya na abogado, cornering him. They even tried to deny that he would be seated next to his legal counsel, lawyer. Huwag na tayo maglokohan. Bumalik na yung problema sa krimen. Kaliwat kanan ng kidnapping, snatching, patayan. Bumalik na naman yung trend dati. Pag nasa LRT ako, nakikita ko yung mga tao, hindi na nagba-backpack. Nagpa-front pack ulit. Kahit na mga minimum wage earners. Kasi nakikita nila at natatakot sila na baka ibuksan yung zipper ng mga bag nila, ikukuha yung cellphone, ikukuha yung wallet, yung pera. Yung pera. And yung droga, hindi bumabalik. Bumalik na talaga. As in, dati, sa mga, lalo na sa mga clubs dun sa BGC, sa Taguig, yung mga police, they dress up as civilian attire to disguise. And pupasok sila sa mga club at hinuhuli nila yung mga tao nagda-drugs doon. Ngayon bumabalik na lahat. Mga mayayaman, mga politiko, doon sila nagsesesyon. These drug lords, these drug pushers, they have no reason to be afraid. And why would they? Kung ang presidente, ang kasulukuyang presidente mismo ay isang drug addict.
Danny, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So anong in aid of legislation ang hinahanap itong mga congressmen na ito? Is it to give more human rights to drug addicts, drug pushers, and drug lords? Ano ba ang hinahanap nila? And if that is their direction, could it be that the drug lords are lobbying for more rights under our law because we have an imperfect system that protects the citizens from them? Ganun ba ang gustong palabasin itong mga quack-cob na ito? Ha? Ano ba? Did they identify what legislation they are pushing? Because I heard Amante saying that hindi raw obligado na i-identify kung anong law ang gusto nilang ipasa o what kind of legislation they are pursuing, which is wrong, no? Because you have to submit the agenda of the committee and what law are supposed
Low
to be
battery.
understood
Please charge.
before any of these things could be discussed.
At saka,
So, ano ba ito talaga? Ano ba nangyayari dito?
nais kong i-follow up yung point mo. We taxpayers are funding the Congress and these congressmen, particularly like Cabante, by hundreds of millions every year. And he is not responsible to us about what they're doing. Anong klaseng sagot yan ni Abante?
Yeah.
And how do we make him responsible or answerable to what erroneous notion he is expressing? One of the problems of our check and balance system, so-called, is the separation of powers, and the immunity Congress possesses from public prosecution, bringing our complaints to Philippine courts to investigate Congress, for example. Our law student is tied up, Joshua, but these are
Low
some of the
battery.
questions that we should
Please
raise
charge.
already.
Well, for instance, Carmentong, are they not subject to lifestyle check? They're wearing Rolex watches, if they're driving Cadillac Escalades, if they're using bags and dresses that are and shoes that are costing the taxpayers millions and millions of pesos. Hindi ba yan ang dapat ng mga batas na tinatalakay nila?
Yeah, and then let's go back to Danny to respond to the question.
Yeah, Kado, it's very obvious they are not seeking to create legislation. This is a fishing expedition, malinaw. At yung mga congressman doon, nagpa-preside over the committee, sila Congressman Abante, sila Congressman Ace Barbers, before, they were praising the drug war. Sinabi nila, they were praising Duterte for having the courage to launch the drug war. Ngayon, umiiyak na sila sa EJK, si Ace, si Representative Barbers dati at si Dan Fernandez. Gusto pa nila i-declare
Low
ng
battery.
ICC na persona
Please
non
charge.
grata. Ngayon, welcome nila. They're doing the job of the ICC board. They see Representative Abante. Gusto niya ibalik yung death penalty para ma-strengthen yung war on drugs. At gusto niya ibalik yung stoning.
2 points, no? Danny.
Itong mga human rights, so-called human rights victims, hindi ba dapat bigyan nila ito ng free legal aid para meron naman tayong constructive na amendments na magawa, no? Na pagka ikaw ay victim ng human rights, bibigyan ka ng gobyerno ng free legal aid. Of course, this is already in existing, pero maybe they're requiring special cases so far as this is concerned. And hindi ba sila pwedeng mag-file ng case sa NBI, sa police? Hindi ba sila, are they prevented from accessing our judicial system and our courts? At hindi ba kalalabas lang ng statement ng
Low battery.
Supreme Court
Please charge.
na yung mga final nilang cases beforehand, just a few weeks ago, have all been dismissed? Di ba? So saan papunta itong wild goose chase na ito? Anyway, before you respond to that, napansin ko na during the session, nag-excuse si Ace Barbers. Alam mo ba kung bakit? Dahil meron siyang kamag-anak, kapatid yata, at ginamit yung kotse niya sa Surigao at nahulihan ng shabu. At na-trace pa rin sa isang hotel room na ginawang, pangalan nito? Ginawang hideout ng mga shabu dealers. Discuss ba ito? Because they're discussing drug-related cases.
Since you bring that out, Kado, why don't we also demand drug test dito sa
Low battery.
listang ito?
Please
In
charge.
that connection, but let's get back
Oh,
to that.
yes. Kasi, ultimong si Speaker Pate Romualdez, napansin ko.
Okay,
Ganyan na rin eh.
let's get back to
Parang
Danny
medyo lang.
to answer your question, Danny.
Yeah, I agree with your. I agree with. Yeah, I agree with what you say. No, dapat i-demand ng isang hair follicle drug test para sa lahat ng mga public officials, public servants. You know, starting with the president.
Well, in connection with the question of Kaado, I think we should bring up the fact that this is not a legislative exercise. This is, as what you have said, a fishing expedition. But more than the fishing expedition, it's a geopolitical and political campaign against the Dutertes. Geopolitical because it's the Americans
Low battery.
prodding the
Please
local
charge.
politicians. And there is a confluence of interest between the Americans and the House Speaker, Tambaloslos or Martin Romualdez, who's interested to block any future competition to his bid to become the next president of the Republic. So this is entirely politicized. It has nothing to do about legislation. And I noticed also, and I don't know if Danny can confirm this, that this arch enemy of the Dutertes in the House right now, Abante, Congressman Abante, shook the hands of President Duterte after the exercise in calumny and lambasting of President Duterte.
Yes, I did notice that. So, ang tapang-tapangan dito si Congressman Abante. Pagkatapos ng hearing, dumapit siya kay PRRD. And he shook the hands. You know, you cannot help but be starstruck by the former president. No, I think there are many commentators who say na kung mas mataas yung rate, the longer yung nagsalita yung congressman, mas mataas daw yung rate. Yun yung sinabi ng tao dyan. And yes, let's get through the numbers, no? Kasi si Congressman Abante, sinabi niya na may 30,000 namatay sa war on drugs. Let's be very clear. Nung number na yun ay hindi galing sa gobyerno, hindi galing yan sa PIDEA.
Galing sa Rappler yun.
Galing sa Rappler, galing sa mga komunista. Ito yung totoong, these are the real numbers. And si Congressman Ace Barbers, he would know because he championed the campaign of the hashtag real numbers before where he praised the drug war. So according to the PNP, 6,000 deaths, according to the government, 6,000.
6 to 7,000.
Yeah, 6 to 7,000 deaths. But
Abante therefore must produce 24,000 bodies.
yes,
So, Congressman Abante, asa na yung mga patay? Kung yan ay nagkalat sa kalye, nangangamoy na yan, matagal na, no?
At saka bakit yung paulit-ulit tinatanong ni Presidente Duterte, sino nagpa-file ng kaso sa mga ito? Sa korte? Wala, di ba? Andyan ang daming mga human rights groups na pwedeng mag-assist. Why are no cases being filed
Correct.
against President
And
Duterte?
they should assist because they're being paid
If you have-
handsomely by the
if you have
United States.
30,000 EJK victims, wala ba ni isa na magpa-file ng kaso na may katulong pang mga American funded agencies like Amnesty International and so on? So these are very practical questions.
yes, tama yan eh. Kung talaga meron 30,000 na extrajudicial killings, mag-file kayo ng kaso sa korte. Here are the real numbers. Paulit-ulit sila yung 30,000 EJKs. These are the real numbers from the PNP and the PIDEA. 1.6 million people voluntarily surrendered, alive, buhay, sa rehabilitation. This is from General Anyo, who is still in the administration of Bongbong Marcos. 1.6 million people surrendered alive for rehab. Half of them are now back to normal lives. 50% are back to normal lives. 58% of the 44,000 barangays, almost 60% of all the barangays in the country after the 6 years of the drug war were free of drugs. 58% of the barangays. And as well, when we talk about the other aspects of the crime that was
These are
fought,
the real numbers.
these are the real numbers.
And if you compute the 6,000 official figures of those killed in the operation, the drug operation, that is only 0.0-something% of the entire universe of the drug addicts who submitted for rehabilitation, of the numbers of raids and so on. I don't know if we can access the figure, but
Yeah. Kahit na, let's say, pabigyan na natin na 30,000 namatay dun sa drug war, yung EJK. Even if we use the 30,000 figure, that is only less than 2% of the combined alive and dead. Alive, yung sinabi ko kanina, yung 1.6 million. na surrendered alive for rehab. Yeah, so these are the real numbers.
I don't know if Joshua can access yung USIP, no? And ito, ayan, may figures na po dyan. No? Can you read
Okay,
it out?
I'll read it. I'll read it. Okay, I need to move a bit.
Death, 6,252, government figure, o nawala. Yan.
Ayan.
Okay,
Yeah, so pabigyan natin, let's say talagang totoo na may 30,000 extrajudicial killings. Okay. According to the government statistics, 1.2 million people voluntarily surrendered alive, buhay, for drug rehabilitation. 48%, almost half, are now back to normal living as of 2022. Now, let's consider the deaths. Government's figure is 6,000. The media's figure, yung sinasabi ni Congressman Abante, 30,000. So kahit na, let's say, 30,000 yun, that is still less than 2% of the total combined alive and death numbers. So these are real numbers. You make your own conclusions. And the people have made their own conclusions. 88%, 9 out of 10 of Filipinos, kahit na hindi sila supporter ni Duterte, they support the policy of the drug war. It was widely popular. 75%, 88%, 9 out of 10% of Filipinos supported the drug war. Huwag na tayo maglokohan dito. It was good for the people. Tayo ang nakinabang dun sa war on drugs na yan.
Yeah, so I don't know if Joshua can access the USIP comment on opium, but it might be difficult because I wanted to show that if we can find it at the moment, the commentary of the United States Institute for Peace, supposedly on the Afghan opium situation, where the Taliban has eradicated opium production, but the United States Institute for Peace frowned on this and said that this is bad for Afghanistan, the eradication of opium production, because it will cause loss of jobs and income for the Afghan farmers and so on and so forth. When I think the general idea that we have is that we want to suppress all drug production and proliferation. But behind all these drug scourge all over the world, it's really the Western powers. And this has been going on for a few hundred years, since the time of the opium wars in China. Yeah, there it is. The Taliban successful opium ban is bad for Afghans and the world, according to the United States Institute for Peace. I don't know if I can find the name of the one who spoke this. It is said by this author, William Byrd, a PhD, for the United States Institute for Peace. The Taliban successful opium ban is bad for Afghans and the world. The ban is not a counter-narcotic victory, he says, and will have negative economic and humanitarian consequences, potentially leading to a refugee crisis. But what we know that has become a refugee crisis from Afghanistan is the war in Afghanistan of the United States of America.
That we are shouldering.
That now they want to send to the Philippines.
Yes. Yeah.
Isa pang kinalulungkot ko dito. Isumali na si Executive Secretary, former Chief Justice Lucas Bersamin sa circus. Nung i-announce niya, quote, the former president desires to surrender itself to the jurisdiction of the ICC. The government will neither object to it nor move to block the fulfillment of his desire. But if the ICC refer to the process to Interpol, which may then transmit a red notice to the Philippine authorities, the government will feel obliged to consider the red notice, the request to be honored, in which a case the domestic law enforcement agencies shall be bound to accord full cooperation to Interpol pursuant to established protocols. Eh, nag-comment dito ang ating kaibigan na si Dr. Melissa Loha. Has Khan, sino ba itong Khan?
Head ng
Prosecutor.
Prosecutor Khan recommended a warrant of arrest. If not, no ICC chamber can issue a warrant. Interpol is not an arm of the ICC. It is strange that Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin is preempting the process. In fact, under the Rome Statute, itong si Melissa Lohan, by the way, is a doctor of laws.
Who's based in Copenhagen now?
Yeah, and it's international law expert. In fact, under the Rome Statute, the ICC is required to wait for the domestic process to end. The House inquiry is a kangaroo court to Qualcomm. But it is still a process that has to be completed. In other words, after this process, yung judicial process, and after the judicial process, pag nag-fail pa yan, kung may reklamo, kung may demanda, saka lang papasok ang ICC. Interpol does not issue warrants of arrest. No. Ito, ako nagugulat dahil Chief Justice of the Supreme Court ito, bobo ka, Lucas!
Eh,
You're improvising.
namumuliti ka na rin kasi
Namumuliti ka na rin.
eh,
By the way, nag-aaway daw sila ni Lisa Araneta.
Tamalos-los at Lisa Araneta
Oo,
because
nag-aaway
Lisa
dahil sa appointment ng Customs Commissioner. So, nakikinabang na. Nagsasalibate na si Lucas Bersamin. Sa dami ng kwarta at dami ng mga appointees na pwede niyang ilagay sa gobyerno.
well, yeah.
My goodness, what kind of a government do we have right now? Wala kang ma-expect sa executive, wala kang ma-expect sa
Judicial
sa
Department.
legislation. No? And lahat ng nakikita ko ngayon is just a clear argument for a revolutionary government for the abolition of Congress. Walang silbi. Ang laki ng pera. 1 trillion ang ginagastos nyo kada taon. Wala kayong pakinabang. Lahat kayong bobo.
Okay, let's get back to the subject matter. Danny, you
Yeah.
are going to request some.
Yeah, just remove the I'd like to address a message to Congressman Abante and all of these other NPA aligned congressmen,
Pagwan.
Paduan and all of them. Before the proceedings began properly, Congressman Abante addressed the people like us, DDS bloggers, people who support the former president and his war on drugs, particularly, as trolls. We are trolls now. Congressman, we are not trolls. We are ordinary citizens who want peace and order, because without peace and order, there would be no development. There would be no economic prosperity. We are not trolls. We are real people. You will not silence us. We are telling you, we are only telling the truth, and we will not allow you and your colleagues to destroy the legacy of the former president, which kept us all safe from drugs, terrorism, and crime. I myself and my community benefited from this. Before the war on drugs began, Metro Manila, NCR, 92% of the shabu was being produced in NCR. If he did not declare the war on drugs, we would have been already a narco state. 92% of shabu production was focused dito sa Metro Manila. So much so, in less than 2 months after PRRD's inauguration, just outside my school, an apartment, a drug lab disguised as an apartment complex was raided. PIDEA estimated that it was producing 200 kilograms of shabu every week. They confiscated 30 million pesos worth of drugs. This was August 2016, if you want to check. Outside Grace Village, just inside the community of my school. How many people, how many children would that have, and their lives and their families would have been destroyed had that not secret lab been raided?
Well, Danny mentioned your pet peeve, Congressman Abante. I have 3 issues with him so far as this investigation is concerned. Number 1, siya ang troll ni Tambalstos. Huwag na tayong paikot-ikot pa. Pangalawa, natakot ako nung mag-threaten siya. Sabi niya kay Duterte, Mr. President, pag nagmura ka, hindi namin palalampasin yan. Tapang-tapang. Mr. President, if you insist on saying bad words here, I will move for a motion of order.
Point of order.
At pangatlo, I wish to reassure you too, who likes Abante so much, or dislikes Abante so much, that we have your best word of Cisco Moreno, who is now running for mayor of Manila, that he will make sure that Abante and Chua will no longer win the congressional seats back, and he will campaign hard, miski matalo raw siya yun.
Yeah, I hope they destroy each other, Yorme
Yeah.
and the other politicians.
Sila dyan.
Yorme himself is not an ideal
Kaya
public servant too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Pinagmamalaki din niya ang mansyon niya,
Oo.
yung mamahaling mga sasakyan niya. We have to really go back to the lifestyle check of our political.
Check na lahat ng tao dyan.
And I'd just like to address also itong mga sa in front of us during sa Quadcom hearing, itong mga CPP, NPA, NDF representatives, party list, representatives. Ang kakapal na mukha nyo to talk about and lecture about extrajudicial killings. At ayaw nyo isama si PRRD sa pagpatay niya mga tao. Kayo, the CPP, NPA, you are the biggest purveyors of extrajudicial killings. Hindi ba kayo yun? You purged, magkasamahan nyo, thousands of your own comrades suspected of being state agents. That's you.
That's Operation Missing Link.
Yeah.
And remember
How
the
many
name.
children have been recruited by these CPP, NPA?
Another code name nila, Cadena de Amor, if I recall correctly. Do you recall?
What about the human rights of these children that have been recruited to join the CPP, NPA and killed by the military? Do their human lives not matter? So these CPP, NPA legal urban operatives, congressmen, congresswomen, you have no shame. You have no authority to lecture about killings and the sanctity of human life and such.
And for that matter, to the congressmen and senators and the responsible cabinet members and the president currently, of course, where we now have a society where 58% of our population declare themselves as poor, and a great proportion of that goes hungry every day, and many undoubtedly die of hunger. They are part of the murderous problem created by the political system in our society. So I don't know how we are going to end this inquisition Congress has been prodded to do by the Americans and the political predators. But something has to be done about them.
One thing we can do, especially in this upcoming election, do not vote for these politicians who think the Senate or the Congress is a platform for them to get to be popular and disregard the rights of these resource persons and witnesses they invite to these investigation in aid of legislation vote hearings. Hindi kayo mga husgado. Hindi korte ang Senado. Your job as legislators is to make laws, not investigate. Again, trabaho yan ng NBI, trabaho yan ng police. Hindi kayo investigator. That is not your job.
Tatagdag ko yan. Hindi kayo megaphone ng mga intrigador, which you have really become. Anyway, Danny, what else do we discuss in relation to the Quadcom hearings and former President Duterte and President to-be Sara Duterte?
Kamentong, I think we need to talk about what you. I need to talk about what you said earlier, the geopolitical angle, of what's happening. As Ambassador Bobby Tiglao has written in his columns, that this is all a political hit job against Duterte. Hilahin si Duterte, tiraan yung pangalan niya para madamay si VP Sara, yung looks to be the next future president, because she is very popular. 71% trust rating in the Pulse Asia survey, top choice in Oculus, no? In the surveys. And yung takot ng mga Amerikano, which is I think the hidden hand behind these Quadcom hearings and this political persecution against PRRD is takot ang mga Amerikano kasi baka pag nakabalik na ang mga Duterte, ipatalsik niya yung mga Amerikano dito. Yung military bases, yung EDCA, yung US Typhoon missile system, para hindi na tayo maging Ukraine of Asia or worse, the Gaza or the Rafah of Asia with these US military bases.
At mababalik ang mga tulungan ng China at ng Pilipinas sa ekonomiya po, which the rest of Asia is benefiting from, but not the Philippines. Yan ang isang talagang gustong mangyari ng Amerikano, maudlot ang ating economic recovery at economic development. Dahil kung ganyan pong mangyari, in a few years time, makakakalas na po tayo sa colonial status vassalage natin sa Estados Unidos.
Okay, I think we can visit some of
Are there
the...
any questions?
Yeah, let's visit the questions from Facebook, Zoom, or in YouTube Live. We ask them, we would read them and try to answer all of your questions.
Anyway, in the meanwhile, while we're checking,
Yeah.
anong comment mo after that? You were going to say something? Mercado?
About
Yung ating pinag-usapan.
Geopolitical angle
Ayun.
of this investigation.
So, yeah, in that connection, we should also take a look at the expose of, I think from Bobby Ticlao, about one of the lawyers of NUPL who is actually an ICC asset, si Attorney Conti. I don't know if Joshua can access that email.
Assistant to counsel of the ICC, assistant to counsel.
Bobby Ticlao, that would mean one of the lawyers of NUPL
According
who
to
is actually an ICC asset, si Attorney Conti. Any questions here? Access that email?
Assistant to counsel of the ICC.
May
Assistant to
mga
counsel.
areas na that would be one of the lawyers of NUPL
According to
who is actually an hydrographic survey asset, si Attorney Conti. Any questions here? Access that email?
Assistant to counsel of the ICC.
may areas
that would be one of the lawyers of NUPL.
Yan ang problema ng Mamrie. Ang ginawa lang nilang mapa was an unofficial map. At hindi po ito sinumite sa International Hydrographic Organization. No? Bakit? Kasi alam nila, no, na unang-una, ito lang petition natin, yung motion natin sa United Nations na sinamit natin, kung saan nag-object ng China a few weeks ago. Few months ago.
Vietnam and Malaysia.
Vietnam, Malaysia, and China at the very least ay nag-object. Ay hindi ito papasa. Kailangan magkaroon ng legal basis yung mapa eh. Akala nila basta magdodrawing lang. No. Akala ninyo magsasubmit lang tapos sa-aprobahan? No. Hahanap. Pati yung coverage ng Mutual Defense Treaty na pinirmahan natin treaty sa Amerikano noong 1951, kaya walang bulhan dyan. Hindi kasama ang South China Sea doon sa accompanying map sa Mutual Defense Treaty. Kaya ito, walang batas. Subject to confirmation pa ito ng commission. No? Ano ba tawag sa commission na yun? CSLN ba yun na Joshua? Paki-verify. CLSN o CSLN? Aprobahan po yan. This is the same body na nag-approve noong Benham Rice. Aprobahan pa po yan kasi in-increase pa natin ang ante. Hindi lang tayo humihingi ng 200 nautical miles sa PEZ. Humihingi pa tayo ng additional 150. So it's a total of 350 nautical miles. Yung additional na 150 is now a continental shelf additional. Ang problema dito, mga kabansa, kaya hindi ho sigurado ako na hindi aaprubahan ng United Nations body yan. Bakit? Because precisely, it creates a dispute with China,
Okay.
with Vietnam, and Malaysia.
Breaking news, Malaysia to protest new Philippine maritime laws over Sabah claim. But of course, that is part of the continental
Continental shelf.
claim.
But yung sasaba na yan is a separate issue, no? It has its own dynamics, which we can have in a forum later. Kasi alam niyo ba nangyari? The French Supreme Court dismissed as invalid yung stampa arbitration pertaining to Sabah. But I will not discuss that now. Sabi ko nga, that's for another day.
Yeah.
Anyway, ang punto ko dito, ang desisyon ho ng International Hydrographic Organization will be based on the action of the United Nations body that approve our Benham rights over this petition to extend by 350 nautical miles towards the West Philippine Sea na tinatawag nila, which supersedes and protrudes through the sovereignty claims of China. In other words, even by UNCLOS, sa UNCLOS na lang eh. Anong provision? Balik ho sa bilateral negotiation. So, ito hong kalokohan ni Francis Tolentino, ni Bong Revilla na International Maritime Zones Act is actually tama-tama kay Bong Revilla at saka kay Lito Lapid because this is by actors in the Senate. No? Yung mga artista dyan. No? Wala hong ngipin yan. Actually, hindi sila nakinig kasi kami kay former Justice Hardelesa na sabi ni Justice Hardelesa, bago tayo pumasok dyan sa Maritime Zones Law or Bill, ayusin muna natin yung PD 9522 kasi nawawalan tayo ng teritoryo. And as we have shown you today, we stand to lose 900,000 square kilometers of sovereignty of territorial waters na hindi natin pwedeng palitan ng EEZ. Kasi gaho, sumusupla yan sa claims ng China. Pag may ganyang provision, mga kabansa, ibabalik yan ng United Nations sa mga parties concerned for negotiation. Kung hindi compulsory arbitration, and since we opted out of it, it will go back to bilateral negotiation. So, back to zero. Nagsaya lang ng laway at tinta, itong mga hayupak ng mga congressmen and senator at yung sayang yung pinirma ni Bongbong Marcos sa tinta para bigyan lang ng rule-based basis ang Amerikano para yung sea lanes, kasi ginagamit nila ngayon 12 nautical miles natin at saka yung territorial and archipelagic waters natin, dito sila nagdadaan sa loob natin, ay humaba palabas ng Pilipinas at papasok to acquire more space papuntang China.
Okay, I think we can now wrap up our discussion unless Danny has something to add.
Ayun, comment of
Yeah,
United States Commission on Limits of the Continental Shelf. CLCS.
Yeah. So I want to end with this slide about the Xi Jinping PROBOO agreement to jointly develop the overlapping claim area.
Alam mo kami ito,
Yes.
nauna tayo sa nuclear power.
Well,
Nahuli na tayo. Ngayon nauna tayo sa joint exploration. Ngayon nahuhuli na naman tayo. Palagay ko mayroong sakit ng Pilipino dito.
because anyway, President PROBOO sees the wisdom of the Chinese proposal ever since Deng Xiaoping to set aside the disputes and jointly develop
Don't
the
you see
resources.
The wisdom?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Don't you see the wisdom? I see the wisdom.
Oh.
Everybody else sees the
And
wisdom except the
Probo-
president and the congressman and the
And
senator.
Probo sees the wisdom, but there are some Indonesians like here who are assets of the Americans that are now cackling and protesting. Pareho din, meron din sila na mga proxies, may ambush din yan. Kasi may mga NGOs na pinupondo ng Amerikano, may think tanks na pinupondo ng Amerikano tulad dito sila Richard Aydarian, sila Manhit, sila Batumbakal doon sa CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies. Trillanes, of course, sa ICC naman direkta at inaamin niya. He is working with the ICC whom the Philippine Republic does not recognize. Ano?
I was surprised, no? Kasi si Congressman Abante, he said, he pointed to Trillanes nung hearing. He said, Trillanes is conniving with the ICC.
Ayun.
From the
So maraming talagang katraidoran po sa ating mga politiko, ang ating mga scholars sa Lasal, lalo na Ateneo.
Mahirap talaga walang breathing.
Yeah, just a last message to those maraming tao na nagpupusturang na, patriot sila, na, tumasakay sila sa atin ng West Philippine Sea trend, nakikiuso sila. And yet, they are the same people calling for the ICC to come here in the Philippines and conduct an investigation in the drug war and issue an arrest warrant for President Duterte. It is ironic that the people who claim to fight for sovereignty are the ones who want to surrender it to the ICC.
Yeah. So I will bring back the Probowo Sea Agreement kasi yan lang po ang konkretong magiging pakinabang po ng mga bansa na may claim to dyan sa South China Sea. Hawakan na ang natural gas at ang langis at ng malunasan po ang krisis enerhiya. Yan ay pera sa kamay ng sambayanang Pilipino tulad ng magiging pera po para sa sambayanang Indonesian. At tulad ng nagiging talagang cash na para sa Malaysian population at Vietnamese population yung pagkakasundo dito sa mga issues na to at tulungan, hatian sa pakinabang galing sa mga yan. So we must campaign for the wisdom to replace the grand stupidity that has been going on for 10 years. Kaya po ang tema natin itong ating session and forum and symposium is the bankruptcy of lawfare and the productivity, fruitfulness, and the wisdom of cooperation tulad ng ginawa na ngayon President Probowo and President Xi Jinping na ginawa na ng Pilipinas under President Duterte na sinabotahe naman ng American voice na naman sa Pilipinas. With that, we will end our discussion. Merong habol ba? Merong habol?
Meron akong habol.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Ngayon ko lang naintindihan yung Great Wall of China.
Oh.
Dahil kailan tayo titigil mga kabansa? Yung maritime zones law na yan ay parang panibagong palitada sa bakod na inuumpog natin ang ating ulo. Nagdurugo na yung ulo. At yung bituka ng Pilipino ay nagugutom na dahil kapumugo ng ulo. Hindi ba tayo titigil dyan hanggat hindi nabibiyak ang ating bugo para kausapin lamang ang isang kaibigan na wala namang hiningi sa Pilipinas during the time of Duterte? Puro regalo ang ating tinanggap. Wala. Are you aware of anything in return that the Chinese asked for the goodness and the generosity of the Chinese people that was shared with us by Xi Jinping during the time of Duterte? More than the 3 bridges. Every time there is a disaster, nauuna sila dyan. And I don't have to enumerate them all dahil napakarami. So, ano ho ang talagang dapat? Katigasan ng ulo o pakikipagkaibigan? Yan eh. Ang Chinese, you don't really have to strong arm them kasi imposible kung magawa natin yan. Especially with this guy, Romeo Browner, admitting na natalo na ang gobyerno sa narrative dyan sa West Philippine Sea. Ha? Na mga mosquito bloggers. Ha? Imposible.
Okay.
Si Duterte nakipagkaibigan lang ho. Si Trump, hindi naman niya inaway. Kinaibigan din niya. At ngayon, babalik si Trump. Kaya abangan, mga kabansa, ang susunod.
That will be yeah, go ahead. Sige, sige. No, I just wanted to add that at the end of the month of November or start of December, we will do an evaluation of the Trump incoming presidency.
first month.
We will be doing that.
So, all right, I'll be closing the discussion now. Thank you to everyone who has joined us in Facebook, YouTube, and in Zoom. Thank you for sending us your questions, tuning in to the live stream, and then the replay. My final message, again, thank you to Kamento and Kado for your presentation, of course, myself. Final message is this. We are all very thankful to the former President Rodrigo Duterte. Paulit-ulit sila sa propaganda nila, di paulit-ulit din tayo sa mga truth telling. Thank you, former President Rodrigo Duterte, for your courage in fighting for us, the people, to keep the country safe, fighting these drug lords, these criminals, and these terrorists. And my message to those coddlers of criminals, terrorists, and their enablers, mas marami kami. Tahimik lang kami, pero nandito kami at lalabas kami sa halalan or in a people's revolution. You lay a finger even on a hair of the former president, things are going to get ugly. Thank you. Yun lang po.
Thank you very much.